Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Martin Scorsese's The Irishman from this year. So yes, finally here to talk about this film, and what a film it is. Of course, spoilers warning. If you haven't seen this film, of course, be warned. This is not a film. You want spoiled. Of course, and if you haven't seen it, just come back to this maybe once you have, or at least be warned. There will be some plot details, kind of some deaths and stuff, big events I'll be getting into, or at least glossing over, and yes. With that said, let's dig in to this film, and to note, of course, just to say this may not be a massive review, purely because, well, a number of reasons. First being, I've seen it once. Of course, I saw this, a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to kind of let it marinade, or if you will, and just kind of let it really sink in. And actually, I was too emotional to ever think about reviewing it on the night of watching this. No way would I have been able to do that. And secondly, it's such a big film, such a kind of a project with massive, it's such a meaty film in that sense. And seeing it only once, of course, and saw it on Netflix, actually. I couldn't get around to seeing it in the cinema as much as I really wanted to. I had to settle for the streaming service, as Netflix is known. But that was fine by me, in the sense that I did just want to see this film. And I couldn't see it, so I gave up, or kind of hope in that sense. It wasn't going to happen. But I sat down to watch this 2 weeks ago, and yes, this won't be, maybe the only review I'll do of this film. That's what I'm saying. Maybe another review, perhaps next year, or at least another video where I say more of my thoughts on the film. But for now, all you have is this review, and me to talk about this film the best I can, just telling you my thoughts, my reaction to this film, and what it kind of means to me. And wow, of course, this film, I think this year, especially, this and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood were my most anticipated films. After seeing that film, the Hollywood, I think I was definitely kind of thinking, actually probably this film here will be my favourite of the year, maybe, kind of just guessing there. Slightly underwhelmed, obviously being honest there, with Hollywood, of course. But this film, I just think I'd heard about this, of course, for some time, and just hearing that De Niro, who is my favourite actor, if you didn't know, and of course Al Pacino, who's never worked with Scorsese until this film, and this being another gangster film, what Scorsese is mostly, at least overall best at, I feel, this kind of stuff, or gangsters of any kind of time period, including Gangs of New York. That's technically a gangster film, and Goodfellas, of course, and all these kind of films, Mean Streets, if you will. And yes, I think, of course, he is mostly known for gangster films, you could say. I think just hearing that this is going to be a gangster film with all these people, Pacino, as I say, never working with Scorsese until this film, and of course Harvey Keitel, Bobby Cannavale, just all these people, Stephen Graham, a few people there I mentioned, and there is others that are in, of course, Boardwalk Empire, which Scorsese's involvement in, and of course a gangster show there, so that's just great as well. But all this talent rolled into one, and just hearing about this, the acclaim it received, people comparing it to such films as The Godfather, of course, Once Upon a Time in America, and it does share some qualities with the latter. I don't think it's, this is a film that I had some expectations. I thought it'd be like this and maybe like that, trying to imagine what this would be like. But really, in the end, I was quite surprised by what this film really was, and kind of how it didn't really resemble. In some regards, it didn't resemble any of his work until this point, which is really interesting. In other terms, I thought, for example, I thought this wouldn't be anything like Goodfellas. It's not going to be like that at all. Surprisingly, it was. At first, I think it was very strange. Kind of just seeing this film, the flow of it. Despite being a massive epic. Even I'll admit that. This is a big epic, covering many years, a couple of decades, of course, a few decades. The 50s is we mainly start off with character of Frank Sheeran, and of course I won't be getting into the real life stuff here. This is based on this film as a piece of cinema and what it means to me and stuff. And Scorsese, among his filmography, of course, but yes, Frank Sheeran, this truck driver, of course, eventually hitman, and basically working with these, this crime family. Russell Bufalino, played by Joe Pesci, of course, forming their friendship. Eventually, a little bit into the film, we have Jimmy Hoffa, very famous, of course, but yes, Al Pacino plays him, and is basically involved with the union, very, very high up, of course, a big, big influence, and kind of, in partnership, you could say, of many involving, this crime family, so it's kind of intertwines, of course, and it jumps between different time periods. In fact, the opening scene is kind of in this retirement home, of course, with Frank Sheeran, and then he recounts the film. So it's non-linear, but very, very different to what I kind of expected it to be. But yes, this, as I'm saying, it feels like this, it feels like that, and it feels like things, I never thought it would do. And I think, this is different, very, very different to the rest of his films, but also very nicely for me, very comforting, comforting way. Similar as well, just in the feeling, just in the joy, for example, of Goodfellas. Actually, I think there is some feelings in this film, very strangely, because, as I say, didn't think it would be. I thought maybe just kind of people, saying that, but actually, the first hour or so, I think, does kind of feel very, very. It's got aspects that are similar to Goodfellas. This energy, this flow. I was very surprised. That this film was just just like that. It was kind of going through this level of energy, this level of excitement. For learning information. Seeing these characters develop. Develop. Of course, the friendships. You see the different families as well. Peggy is a very kind of important character in the film. Of course, the daughter of Frank Sheeran, and then you kind of got the kind of distancing that happens there, which is very, very tragic. You've also at the same time though got this friendship that kind of Jimmy Hoffa forms with Peggy, and and the family as well, and you kind of just see these warm scenes play out. You've also got just brutal killings, all this brutality, and also this warmth that's kind of very, of course, present in films like Goodfellas. This kind of blend, this irony as well. It's here, but it is very, very different. And then the second half is certainly, while it does mirror the structure perhaps of Goodfellas, for example, the rise and fall, perhaps, although it kind of flips in and out at different time periods, so it's hard to kind of judge it like that and compare it, but it does overall have this kind of similarity. But then again, the fall is very, very different, and then you really could say there is kind of like an epilogue, as we know, the last sort of 20-25 minutes, which really took me by surprise actually, and that's the part that really, really moved me actually, and without getting into specifics here, I do, I just felt, just in itself, to do with the involvement here, all these people, these friends, of course, working on this project, reuniting, people that never quite kind of, for example, Pacino, Scorsese never working together, but Pacino, of course, and De Niro have, and it goes throughout, kind of everyone ties together in some way, and all this kind of this feeling, kind of what this is saying actually, I think about these involved in the project, but also of course this story, this narrative, and just as a piece of cinema, this tale, I think really, and also the way it kind of is possibly the final gangster film in this way that Scorsese could make, all this combined, made for a truly moving final act for me. I was floored by this film. I was shocked, when the credits came on, and that final scene where he says, of course, De Niro saying, just leave the door open, basically, a little bit. That is just, that final shot, it really moved me to tears. This whole film is just, in my opinion, flawless actually, and I think I didn't expect this film to be quite to this level. In many regards, for this film even to get into Scorsese's top 10, at this stage, some people say, of course it is, kind of thing and stuff, but I do think that's quite a feat, considering there's films like Mean Streets, Casino and stuff, and all these films that may not be in the top 5. Scorsese's for me, not quite, but they are some of my absolute favourite films. They are masterpieces. He's made, at least 10. That's what I'll say so far. I think these films I've seen, since I, growing up and stuff, a little bit later. Goodfellas, Raging Bull and stuff, but all when before I was kind of 14, really, kind of thing. Loads of these films, Taxi Driver, Mean Streets, of course, but to make a film, this stage in that sense, after all these masterpieces, all these great films, and for it to be, pretty high, among his filmography, that is an achievement, and that's not me. I think, as I say, some people will maybe think it's in his top 10. I think it's higher than that. Well, everyone has their own opinions, but for me to say it's even in his top 10, as I say, at this stage, is remarkable. I think this is an absolute, masterpiece. This is one of the most pleasing films that I've seen, certainly of the decade, and that's to do with expectations, my hopes for the film, and actual execution, actual feeling, and actual connection to the project, all these actors and stuff, and to the actual narrative of this film. This is a film that, of course, Frank Sheeran, you see him, his relationship, with different characters. You see his family life. You see the contrasts, of course, between the three main, you could say, main actors here. The main kind of characters and their families, and how they kind of their friendships grow over time. You also see the actual, of course, killings. Frank Sheeran and how he kind of goes about this and his rise into this empire, if you will. But then, of course, you see this. The second half of the film is truly reflective. Wow, what a spiritual experience this was, and of course, you have everything in one really in this film. It's an epic film, and of course, some will complain about the length. As I say quite often, a film is never too long. Never too long. It's just if it's stuff that I am loving, for example, it could go on for many hours, of course. And I love epic films in particular. Actually, I seek out epics. A lot of my favourite films, are epic in length, or just in the nature of an epic, kind of thing, spanning a certain period of time, perhaps. And this film, really is kind of a culmination of so much Scorsese has kind of done here, and of course, just this film. I think I could have seen a lot more of this. This goes by almost too quickly, actually, and you kind of, I was kind of hungry for more, perhaps, when it ended. But then again, the way it does end, the kind of resolution there, and the kind of the finality of it, I think actually I was kind of, okay, let's kind of mellow kind of thing, and let me contemplate, on my thoughts on this film. It's a truly powerful film, I feel, and yes, you have the classic feeling of Scorsese's gangster films. You have something very, very different as well. You have this kind of particular, kind of reflective feeling, of course, as I've been saying, and the way it deals with regret. Of course, the film that is very, very similar to is Once Upon a Time in America. That's all I'll say there. It deals with very, very similar themes, very, very different as well. But it does kind of feel more like that in its themes and its structure. I feel you could say it's kind of one that it deals with regret, of course, distancing from perhaps family members or friends, in a similar way that film does. It is, the kind of length that film is as well. In at least its more popular version, the 29-minute version of that film. But it does also kind of deal with redemption, perhaps, but also just regret, I feel, and it really is a stunning film to behold, and within a decade for me personally of many disappointments, many kind of films that kind of didn't turn out the way I thought they would, and disappointed me, and kind of made me realize so much, within different ways in which this system perhaps is working, and kind of maybe slightly distance myself a little bit from the kind of the way in which I used to maybe watch films, new releases, of course, and how getting hyped, for example, for certain films, and things I thought I wanted, perhaps more hesitant on. But this film, I had a feeling. I had a particular feeling, and of course, Scorsese being an individual filmmaker who I do trust, pretty much always as hyped as I could be for his films. He always gets me excited, and that is because he is one of my favourite filmmakers, and also because rarely have I been disappointed, the complete opposite with any of his films, and this film really exceeded my expectations, and actually it's one of the best films for me of the decade, and really of all time. And of course, that is of course down to one thing as well. We must mention the acting in the film. Robert De Niro is my favourite actor of all time. Of course, a lot of you know that. There are the ones that are close, perhaps, but De Niro for me, pretty much always he has been, my favourite. As long as I've kind of been asked, what is your favourite actor of all time, or one that you always come to kind of enjoy in particular ways, and one that you've seen many of his films and you just love, his performances so much. It's usually been De Niro for me, and to see him in this film, it's kind of such a treat. And I don't really care. In fact, every year really, I think less and less I get I get more and more kind of disheartened and maybe distancing from the Academy, of course, and that's just personal. Kind of, I don't really see as much of a value in it, as past years, I think it used to be something that was more meaningful to me, just more sincere, and actually kind of more of an event to get excited for a little bit. These past few years, it's not been anything too interesting to me, perhaps, but I think if you're talking about that, who do I think deserves Oscars? I could name quite a few from this film. I think De Niro, absolutely. He gives the best performance really for me. But you've also got Al Pacino, as Jimmy Hoffa. This is actually one of his masterful performances for me. Really blew me away. Very hilarious, of course, at first, but then really hit me in the second half. And of course, when he does, as we know, die, that death scene there at the hands, of course, of Frank Sheeran, which is so tragic. That is when it really hit me. How much I actually shouted out no, kind of thing. It was too much. Because his presence throughout the film is just so meaningful, and he's so enjoyable in this film, and the actual the physicality as well of all these actors in this film is something else, and we'll get to the CGI in a minute as well. Quite a surprise there, but yes, Joe Pesci, I think all these three in particular deserve an Oscar for this, in terms of performances. That's my opinion. I think Scorsese would deserve wholeheartedly an Oscar for direction. He directs this film to perfection. The heart of the film, the soul to it. This is, I think, what he's been dealing with throughout his career in so many of his films. Some people don't catch on, or just maybe you don't talk about, is this feeling of spirituality, this feeling of faith and hope, and just he's been doing this since Mean Streets, in my opinion. He's been tackling these themes, very spiritual films. Although on the surface, for example, Goodfellas, may not seem that, especially at first, but it really is to me. And I think this film does a more of a kind of specific exploration of these themes here, and I think it really goes to town in that sense, with the kind of dealings of faith, spirituality, and I think this film really delivers in that sense, and it's so, of course, it's energetic, it flows so wonderfully, but it gets to a point where it really is a moving film, and I think these performances are just so wonderful. Of course, and Scorsese, as I'm trying to say here, infuses so much in the way of emotion. I think the way that these actual individuals, De Niro, Scorsese, of course, and film screenmaker as well. Once again, all these, I think, individuals, the collaborations, they've kind of had over the years, and also this kind of this film here and what they've brought to this project, it's just truly meaningful. And I think they've infused everything they could into this film. The passion to this, the love of cinema, is all here, in a high form indeed. And I think just in how compelling this film is, how I get wrapped up in this, story that I've never seen, kind of on screen before. And this is it's very interesting, to kind of see a Scorsese just come out kind of thing. It's just, and the fact that this is so meaningful, you could say I've waited for this for many, many years. The actual return of, De Niro, Scorsese being one, but just so many other things. For Scorsese to return to a gangster film again as well, it really is such an experience, and I think everyone involved have just created an absolute masterpiece for me. A tragic, reflective, just melancholic feeling this film has. It really blew me away, and I think it's a hilarious film. It's got the humour, it's got the kind of one-liners, perhaps, the kind of the dialogue, the kind of the scenes. There's a scene in this film involving Stephen Graham's character, Anthony. He really is so good in the film, Stephen Graham. But just there's a scene with him, Jimmy Hoffa, as well, and just a couple of others there, and it's kind of at the table, and it's kind of this. When I saw that scene, I think you know what I'm on about there. I felt like clapping. It's kind of a return to just an instantly a classic scene, a classic Scorsese scene that just is so tense. It's so funny at the same time. These two kind of things that he masters. In his gangster films makes them more believable. They are more humorous perhaps than many gangster films, but they're more grounded for that, and they're more enjoyable, for the humour, and of course actually making it all the more tense and more kind of involving. That scene there, Stephen Graham's performance in this outstanding. I think that kind of rivalry actually throughout the film is one of the things that really just compelled me so much. But you've got so much going on in this film, union bosses and all this kind of stuff. It really delves into this specifically. Once again, the kind of narration that you would expect from a type of Scorsese, like this. But in that sense as well, you don't need to know. If you miss the details, perhaps here or there, it's not going to kind of crucially affect the film because there's so much else going on in this, and it's kind of a film where it kind of zips by, and it's meant to kind of kind of overwhelm you perhaps. I think actually that is one of the things that perhaps Scorsese sets out to do in a lot of these films. Goodfellas as well. If you see that the first time round, you might not get everything in terms of remember all the details here, but I think that's actually one of the great effects of these films, to overwhelm you with this kind of energetic feeling, and just zip by, and then before you know it, you're kind of in this stage of kind of contemplation, and then you look back on the rest of the film. And this one, I look back on the rest of this inspirational individual's career and all those he's worked with, and kind of just smile, but also very, very, it's very saddening. It's very particular feelings that I have about this film that really, really moved me. It really shot into my, real, favourite Scorsese films. It's not, I'll say it now, it's not, kind of, for me, Raging Bull, it's not Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, etc. But apart from these sorts of films, and maybe one or two others, I think it really is right up there with his best. I think this is definitely, one of the best films of the decade, and it really is for me one of the best of all time. This is quite high in my top 200, very high in my top 200 actually, and I think that's on first view. Who knows? This could climb even higher. On a rewatch or two. I think it's very hard to review this film first time round, as I've said, because most of Scorsese films, I've kind of reviewed, have been quite a few times I've seen them. Also, kind of this is, his biggest film in its length and stuff, and there's so much in this film to unpack, and it just kind of, I think there's stuff I could talk about even now, but I don't really want to because it's still quite emotional, in that sense. And I think when I rewatch it, I'll be able to talk about it a bit more, but specifically perhaps. But it really is a wonderful film. This is an absolute masterpiece. Once again, the way this film is shot, it's very, very different. But let's just say very refreshing. I think this return to classicism, classical cinema here, in the way the film is visually, just the way the frames, the framing of the film, the composition in general is just stunning, of course. And the way that's edited, it really is something else. It achieves this, real beauty and this kind of, spiritual feeling just with the way the film is shot and edited and arranged, and this kind of contemplative feeling, and the way that he's arranged his pieces, kind of this puzzle, kind of film, it truly fits perfectly, but also leaves you, kind of wondering, and that's what Once Upon a Time in America does for me, and that's what this film does as well. I think it really is a return, to many, many films in this classic vein, but also something that Scorsese is kind of adding his own kind of spin on, films like Once Upon a Time in America, his own kind of take in this way, perhaps more reflective, contemplative, kind of sad take on the gangster genre, and for that, it really is something to behold. And I think all of the color tones to the film as well, the whole kind of look and feel to this, film is highly nostalgic, but also very, very. There's a kind of a real sadness to this. It's nostalgic in both ways, you could say, kind of joyous, kind of celebration of the past, but also in this particular occasion, in this, in the vein of this story, these characters feeling this regret, perhaps. Of course, Frank Sheeran in particular, and then I think the way the film, kind of is and its visuals reflects that as well. In these stages, it's a very, very sad film. This, and I think, what this kind of says as well is, and what this film really is as well. I think, particularly, for Scorsese and just gangster films, the gangster genre. I think it's kind of really bringing a particular, not saying more of a humanity than his past films, but specifically in this way, a particular humanity and kind of actual examination of the gangster genre. Actually the way that these characters are feeling things, for these humans that they have killed. Particularly, of course, Frank Sheeran's the feelings towards Jimmy Hoffa, and of course the fact that he kills him, in one of them. Kind of final scenes there, that kind of sums it up as well. What Scorsese is doing here, he really is actually kind of humanizing various aspects, of this gangster genre in a particular way. He's kind of dealing with the consequences here of these gangsters, the actions of these individuals, these criminals, and how it's kind of it leads on to things later on in life, and the way in which these individuals are feeling this regret, and of course, just like of course, Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America, it really kind of deals with this regret, this kind of isolation as well, actually, because of what's happened, in past occurrences in these individuals' lives. And I think Frank Sheeran, it's perfectly summed up in his arc, I feel, and this whole kind of humanity that Scorsese brings to this film, and I think he brings this in all of his films. Really, I think his films have been criticised, like violent films do get criticised, gangster films, for not being human, perhaps, and not really kind of showing any value on lives and stuff. But I think the opposite. I think this film surely shows that, in the way that this is a very, very bold film, in its brutality, but it is showing the humanity and, and the regret and actually the meaning and the consequences of, actions, of different individuals. It really does do this. And of course, one of the issues that many had leading up to this film, and I did have a little bit of hesitation, I must admit, is the kind of obvious, the CGI here, how this is going to be actual, CGI, involving De Niro, of course, Pacino, Joe Pesci, etc. And of course, I saw the trailer, of course, the trailer to this film, and I kind of thought, that looks. We'll see what it is, it's like in the final film, and it might actually be. Who knows? It might be quite amazing. That's certainly an understatement. It does, like I thought, take a little bit of time to get used to. It's kind of a film that, at first, it did take me a while to kind of, get into the actual, the makeup of it all. In that sense, it's not traditional makeup, like for example, Once Upon a Time in America, but it is, it is makeup in a sense in the way it's done. And it just took me a while to get used to it. Maybe it's not meant to be, kind of like classic makeup. It's very, very different. It is kind of, it's its own thing. But for what it is, actually, and there's no way it's just kind of me getting used to it. Actually, later on in the film, for quite a lot of the film, I was blown away actually by the CGI. Rarely do I say that. I think, of everyone to kind of do this, Scorsese, I think, is the one. He really wonderfully pulled this off. Everyone involved, what kind of what magic they kind of conceived here. This is actually quite stunning in its CGI, and I think, yes, it takes some getting used to, of course, and you can kind of see differences to what they, looks like, of course, and stuff. But, and of course, I have seen De Niro, and Pacino in films growing up, of course, so it's kind of very, very different for me to see them, what they looked, perhaps what they were meant to have looked like back then, with the use of CGI, but it is, quite stunning actually, and actually really, really surprised me. I didn't think it would be quite this good. As I say, once the film kind of got into the hour mark, really is when it kind of started to really wow me with the CGI. So that's something else as well. And I think just the kind of the physicality as well of these performances. Especially De Niro. This is a brutal film, and of course there's scenes early on, especially where you see many killings. Of course, Frank Sheeran is involved in. This is not the kind of killings you'd see even in Goodfellas or Casino. It's very, very different. There's kind of a brutality, a harshness that actually is not similar to these films. They are brutal. They are ruthless films. Especially, for example, the vice scene in Casino and all these parts. Casino is. It's probably more violent than Goodfellas, for example, but something that's a bit different here. It's much more rigid, kind of gritty in a way that's very, I can't quite describe, but there's kind of just maybe less professional way of killings, in this film. The way Frank Sheeran is kind of just he doesn't deliver clean kills in that sense. It's not quite cinematic in many regards to Goodfellas, for example, in its deaths, but it really is, very, very brutal, this film. There's a lot of moments that, really are very, very brutal and shocking, it really is. But, it's just, it makes for such, thrilling cinema, in my opinion, in this film. And I think then, of course, when it comes later on in the film, this character is going through this reflection on his life, leading up to the final, really epilogue for me. You see the effects, of aging, just in general, and just, I think, finding peace. Really, very, very emotional. Last 20 minutes, trying to reconnect with the family, not quite, very unfortunately. De Niro, of course, Frank Sheeran, connecting to his family, of course. Peggy, especially, she's a character who, as we kind of learn, she has a kind of not a great relationship with her father, and of course, she does kind of go through this distancing very early on, and it's kind of never really rekindled, you could say, and it really is lost by the end of the film. And I think it's such a sad, part of the story really here. I think just the way that Scorsese is, exploring this is truly wonderful, actually. But of course, very very sad. But just in the way it's done, there is a real purity to the emotions. The performances here, Anna Paquin, playing Peggy as when she's older, of course, and what a great performance from her as well. Really really wonderful, stuff here, and I think just the emotion through that, this kind of exploration of family in the film, and the way that this is done, in the end of the film, how this character Frank Sheeran is effectively alone, no one to really kind of turn to in many ways, but then he kind of turns to faith, to religion perhaps, but just generally I think the spiritual feeling that he kind of experiences in the last act of the film is really really stunning. It really is something to behold, and I think it really just moved me so much. Just the film that really at the end of the film, I was wowed, I was kind of thrilled, but more than anything, I think after that final act, I was kind of just speechless, and I think just moved to the core really by this final act. I'll mention a film, Wild Strawberries. Kind of I felt some similarities there. That's what I'll say there, and actually some Ozu films. And I know, of course, Scorsese is a big kind of admirer of all these types of films, and stuff. And I think this really does, kind of in many ways, kind of remind me of these kind of films, and the way that they're done, the purity to that last 25 minutes. It's the most emotional part of the film. It's one of the most spiritual pieces of a Scorsese film that I've seen. Really, really is, and I think this is an absolute masterpiece. All the characters, this world that I'm introduced to, in such a thrilling way, but also a meaningful way. The appearances, of course, of Harvey Keitel. Let's not forget him. Just so amazing to see this. All these appearances. Romano as well. Just so good in the film, so enjoyable, and just the perfect blend of kind of drama, of comedy, and then of course of these tragic aspects later in the film. And just I think the kind of journey we go through, at least I did, really is one that I'll never forget. The feeling that I got, after this whole entire film was watched. I watched, of course, over the one night kind of thing, or afternoon into the night or evening kind of thing. And I think just it was an experience, that I've not had in a while from new releases in that way. And just I think this, certainly going to be. I don't think I'll see a better film from this year. Who knows? But I think this is just a real special film. I've been so disappointed by so many films of this decade. I think this is one that stands, as a pure piece of cinema, in many regards, and just a film that really exceeded my expectations, delivered, on every level, really. I think it's not quite in my top three Scorsese's. I'll say that, it isn't in there, and it won't be in there on a rewatch or anything, because that top three or so, 3 or 4, so it's very hard to kind of get into there. But it's not far off that for me. That's what I'll say there, and I think it really is one of his greatest films in my opinion. Not everyone will love this film. It may be a bit too much, and kind of some people just don't. Are not into these films, and that's fine. It's not for everyone. No film is, but for those that do love, kind of gangster films, dramas, films about friendship that span, a long period of time, just like Once Upon a Time in America, of course. And, these actors, of course, if you were a fan of these actors, I guess a lot of people are. This is a film that you really should check out, of course. And I guess like me, many have been waiting for this to come out and then instantly watching it. I think, but yes, I think even if you haven't, you weren't planning on watching this, I really think give it a go, because it is a unique film and just a sincere and powerful film. Just it really is. Well, just recaptured this time period so wonderfully. No doubt there. Of course, Scorsese knows how to do this. The music, of course, the use of music was just so wonderful. There's actually a lot of songs in this. Songs that are in other Scorsese films, actually. So it was great to see that. This callback brought tears to my eyes, actually, just through the music alone, and just the way that he's using it again. I kind of it does something. When you've seen these films for many years, and you see him tributing these films in essence through just a simple thing like a song playing on the record and radio in the film, and all just used within a scene cinematically. Wonderful film. This is an absolute masterpiece, and it instantly gets into my plus tiers. This is just a stunning piece of work. I think absolutely, and it is very high in this kind of tier. And who knows? It could kind of jump up a tier perhaps. It won't get to my tier S rating, but it could jump up maybe a little bit. But for now, and it's extremely high within this bracket, as I say. But it is, for me personally, I'll go as far to say it's 100% plus tier 2. Now that is something. It really is one of my favourite films. That's something that's very high in my top 200, not quite in my top 100, but that's I've seen so many films, from different directors and stuff, and it is very hard to get into that. But this film, really is a special experience, one that kind of is so thrilling, it's so energetic, it's so fun, creative. The script, Steve Zalian, of course, again working with Scorsese here on the script, and others involved here, and just a wonderful script, so much meaning in it, so much information in just in ways it's introduced. It's just so compelling as a drama, as a crime film, but it's the way the film is structured, the way the film is shot, the way that the film feels in its soul, that really gets me. And of course yes, it's a film that's it's fun, it's a gangster film, it's kind of the way Scorsese makes films. They're never boring, his gangster films, but this is a very different film for him, and one that really specifically goes into this contemplative feeling that we get. A bulk of the film is kind of reflective in a particular way that really got me, and I think just an absolute masterpiece, and one of my favourite films of all time. So of course I think that's it for now. I think I would like to talk about this film more, on a rewatch perhaps, and give another video at least, whether that be another review. It wouldn't be a re-review in that sense, it'd be just maybe The Irishman, another review, or some more thoughts on the film that I couldn't maybe I didn't want to give this time round, because there's places where it's just too emotional just after recently watching it, and just first time viewing, it kind of it just whizzes by kind of thing, and it kind of escapes you at times, and it's very hard to kind of give you an exact review perhaps, but that doesn't really matter. This is what I can offer you now, I think, and it'd be great, I think, to discuss this film in the comments. That's where a lot of the talking will come from, this and more kind of expression in the comments as well. This is a film that I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on. What did you think of the film? It's a real masterpiece for me, and one of my one of the films that has not disappointed me from this decade in particular. Kind of, as I say, that the things that have occurred in different franchises and stuff, and the way that films have changed, have really not impressed me in some ways at all. And this film, luckily, you can put your faith in Scorsese to deliver, I feel, and of course, just a salute really to these actors, De Niro especially, and Pacino, and Pesci, of course. As I say, I think really just returning for this film. Who knows? It'd be great to see him in other films, but that's okay if he's not. And it's his choice, of course. But to see him, I think he's a very loved actor as well, and it was great to see him there. He is a great actor in my opinion, and he's wonderful here. Really the warmth for all these actors, from Scorsese, from everyone involved. You know, it really is a treat to see and to experience. You know, it's a film full of heart. You know, full of passion for just cinema. I feel more importantly than anything. You know, through filmmaking and through humanity and life's wonders and, you know, regret, you know, contemplation, you know, on actions that, you know, that people have taken, you know, that have, you know, things that have happened in people's lives, you know, and how they feel at the end of it, and it kind of goes through all of these stages, you know, explores, you know, family life, you know, the father-daughter relationship, you know, specifically with Peggy, you know, it's really, really sad and just really moving, and of course the just the initial exuberance, you know, the kind of excitement, you know, from the buzz from getting introduced to this world for Scorsese, you know, the way he, as we know, tells a story, you know, in these kinds of films, you know, gangster films, and how he just puts you in there and kind of just takes you through, you know, this kind of tour of a particular world that just is so compelling, you know, for the screen, you know, simply. There's no other way to put it, you know. I think just gangster films, you know, when they're done well and sincerely, I think they can make for great cinema, and Scorsese is one of the masters of this genre. But, you know, a real salute, you know, to all these involved, and Scorsese, you know, just to say to this filmmaker, just I think most of the people can agree with me just how he's very inspiring, truly inspiring, you know, for me, and how he really has, you know, delivered so many masterpieces, and I think just to see him, you know, talking about films as well, is I have a little note here, you know, wrapping up here, you know, to see him talk about films is one of the treats that I get, you know, kind of just seeing interviews with this guy and how he has such a passion for cinema, for life, you know, and he's just such a, I think, a great guy, individual, and you know, he's delivered so much for this medium, and to see him make a film like this, you know, it's kind of an end of an era, it seems like, it feels like anyway. I think a lot of people will agree with that, but just a thanks and a gratification for this individual and those that he's worked with, you know, on numerous occasions, film and screenmaker as well, you know, hats off, of course, and De Niro and Pesci, of course, and, you know, this time around, Pacino, of course, just a treat to see all these, you know, that I've watched since I was quite young, you know, many films, and just, yeah, just, it really means a lot, this film, it just in that sense, and also simply a wonderful film in its narrative, in its visual storytelling, in its, you know, the time period, the way it's portrayed, all the different time periods, and how it kind of glosses over different real events, you know, the death of JFK, you know, really, really emotional in the way it's done, and just, you know, it's treated with a particular level of sincerity, dignity, and humanity. You know, it's a real human film, complex, you know, and sincere and humble, and you know, just the way it kind of is perfectly timed. I think just within, he's made so many of these films, and now he makes this one to kind of say something, actually, you know, link it all in, maybe, and maybe, who knows, send off in that sense. But if he does, you know, if he doesn't make a gangster film again in this way, at least, you know, I think hats off, and a thanks, of course, to this wonderful individual, filmmaker, and all these involved. You know, thank you for all these actors, etc. And they really have done us proud this time, certainly. So this is one of the best Scorsese films for me. Yeah, a massive amount of masterpieces that he's made, and you know, just it's a real treat, you know, just to see, you know, just to see this film at this point, you know, really stand out, you know, and just you can count on Scorsese, I think, to deliver. Really wonderful experience that I had. I can't wait to watch it again. You know, the way it's on Netflix as well. Of course, I'd love to see it on Blu-ray. Who knows if that will ever come? But you know, I have to kind of own this. I hope I do. But yeah, it was a wonderful experience. And tell me your thoughts in the comments, of course, and discuss this film, your thoughts on it, how you felt, you know, and what your favourite characters, etc. Who you know, kind of impressed you the most, and stuff like this, and just, yeah, I think to talk about Scorsese films, gangster films, it'd be so great, but just in general, cinema, and this is certainly a tribute to cinema and another wonderful film from Scorsese, The Irishman, a film that I was hyped for, and it's certainly exceeded my expectations. One of the best films ever made, in my humble opinion. So yes, as always, tell me your thoughts. What did you think of The Irishman? And as always, thanks for watching my review.